Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to thank you for taking the time to join TestHouse today for our live webcast. The focus for our live session today is on streamlining the development lifecycle using Visual Studio Release Management. VSRM introduces new functionality to the Visual Studio ALM suite, allowing continuous testing alongside development in the same sprint. We will also be looking at the build, deploy, and test capability. I am proud to be joined by my colleague, Alex Rhodes, our Senior Visual Studio Consultant at TestHouse, who will present the following. Just a brief introduction to TestHouse and Visual Studio Release Management overview, and talk about build, test, deploy process. Alex will also do a brief demo of VSRM, and towards the end we will have a Q&A session. Before I pass you over to my colleague Alex, please feel free to type in your questions on your Q&A pod now or during the presentation. We will answer all or most of your questions if time permits. Also, a full screen at the top of your screen is also available, which would be very useful when Alex will do his demo. So without further delay, I now pass you over to my colleague Alex.
Hi, good morning, or afternoon even. Brief introduction to TestHouse. So we focus on IT risk mitigation. We're headquartered in London. We've got, as you can see, global presence. We've been a member of the Visual Studio Team System Inner Circle partners since 2005, Gold partner since 2011. We specialise in delivered tailored testing solutions, and we're Visual Studio 2013 experts offering deployment planning services and support, consulting and training. So who am I? Well, I've been in technology for nearly 30 years. I've got experience in development, architecture, engineering and support. A wide experience in different industries, primarily logistics and distribution, retail and financial services. I'm a Microsoft Ecosystems infrastructure specialist, and I'm a Microsoft Visual Studio ALM consultant. So what is Release Manager? Well, it's a function that links to Team Foundation Server and provides deployment automation. It allows you to use the same process every time you do a release. So it removes manual intervention, acceptances and approvals. It enables continuous deployment with a build, deploy, test capability, and means that QA can work on the most up-to-date builds, and it allows defects to be cycled back into the current sprint, simply because the QAs are working on the most up-to-date build. They can put the defects into triage, and they can be fed back in. There's an auditable deployment process. It allows for complex environment topologies. But one thing VSRM isn't, and it's not a magic bullet, it will not do everything. It's not clever. So if you tell it to do something stupid, it will do something stupid. So don't blame the software if you configure it in a bad way. So release management fits in this diagram in between the sprint and the deployment. You can actually feed that release management process into the sprint. So instead of filling up the ops backlog and the product backlog to feed into the next sprint, you can feed the defects into the current sprint, depending on how urgent they are. So release management requires 4 components. So it needs Team Foundation build, the release management server, the release management agents or deployment agents, and the release management client or a web UI. So there's a logical view of the platform. So when Team Foundation server places a build into a drop location, the release management server will pick up that build based on the deployment definition, and then send that information out to the deployment agents and the deployment agents can do lots of different things. It's based on a set of tools that you define in the release process. So you can see this for examples on this slide. It will run PowerShell, MSIs, .exe, batch files, SharePoint templates, can do pretty much anything. You just have to configure those bits. So when you configure the deployments, you've got to think up front what you want to be doing, because it's very easy to get it wrong. So you need to decide who is going to be an acceptor, who will accept the deployment into an environment, who will validate the release once it's gone into the deployment, and who will approve the deployment for the next stage. You need to think about these all up front. And that's very easy to configure. If I can find my mouse, very easy to configure in an interface. So when you set your stage up and you've decided which environment you're going to have, you can use drag this around. So here you decide who's going to approve the release, who owns it, who's going to validate it, and who's going to approve for the next release. They can be TFS users groups or AD users groups, and the requests for actions, if you've got it configured, will be mailed to users. If you haven't got the mail set up, you're going to have to sit there with the UI open and look at it every now and again to make sure you haven't got a request for an approval or a request for action. So you need to also think about the various stage types that you're going to need to deploy to. So development, test, UAT, production, whatever. The technology types, these are just arbitrary values. So we can say that we've got a technology type of database, we've got a technology type of a web front end and a middleware stack. The server definitions, they're all part of the environment that you're going to define with the environments groupings. So they're actually the physical devices that are going to have the deployment agent configured onto, and they'll be going to bound to the environments. So it's relatively straightforward to configure. So via the administration tab on the release management client, you just put arbitrary values in. So you've got an arbitrary value for production test UAT in the stage type, and for the technology type, I've just put a database and front end. Simple, but you can put any values you like in there. It's how you associate the devices later is where it matters. So here you define the servers and the environments. So in this case, my environment name is test, and I've added a server in there called test1, told it it's a server, told it who owns it, and I've told it what supported technology types it uses. So here I would say it's a front end and it's a database, because it's test server, everything's all on one box. There is also a separate servers tab where you can define multiple servers if you want. So you need to configure the release path once all that's configured and set up. And you link the stages, the acceptance criteria, the validations and approvers. And here you can see there's one set up. So here, the first stage and test always have an automated acceptance. That means the first release gets deployed in your systest or dev test platform automatically and sends an alert out to say it's ready to be tested if you've requested for validation. What will then happen is, as there's no approvers, once the developers tested it, it will automatically be promoted across to user acceptance testing because there are no requirements for approvers, and each stage is automated. In the next step, you've got the QA tester has to accept it, and you can see the automation tab, the checkbox is off, and that means they'll get sent a mail to say, do you want to accept this release into this environment? And then it will automatically, once they've accepted it, it will get deployed, and it's owned by IT operations. And again, a validation, senior QA has to kind of say, yeah, okay, this has been tested and it's validated, and we need to approve this for release into production. And again, the same process into production. IT ops is the approver, they're the owner, they're the validators, and a production manager has to approve it, that it's done. So there you've got your auditable approval track, so you can see who's done what, who's accepted what, into what environment. So if something does go wrong, you know who to blame. You can also set multiple approvals if you need, so you don't just have to have one person that approves it, you can have a group of people that approve it at separate stages. So the configuration of the release path is the path, the template contains a release path, the components, the build association, and a deployment sequence. That was done through this interface. Here you define a workflow of how it would be released, and you can see at the top you've got test, UAT, and production environments. I know it's a bit small, but I'm hoping you can see it. And then down on the left-hand side, you've got the various actions that can be placed within that workflow. So you need to define the workflow for this release. You've got various actions and tools that are stored in the Release Manager inventory, and they can be practically anything. They're user-definable, and you get quite a lot of tools that come with Release Manager. You can link in Test Manager actions, so if you want to run some automated tests against different environments, you can plug Test Manager into it to say, you know, I've run this release, can you validate it in UAT, just to make sure it has happened, and if it fails validation, you can tell it to roll it back. Easy to add custom actions, and you can put tokens in your configuration files, and the Release Manager will replace those tokens with the right values that you've predefined associated with the various environments and various servers. Now, in an example release sequence, you kind of say it's deployed to dev, and we want to create a SQL database, configure a service, and run an MSI file. And then QA approves that. And into the next stage, it goes into the test environment. You need to update an ini file, and that could be automated, as I said, by replacing tokens. And then it will deploy into staging. You might want to restore a database into that, run a SQL script, then configure the service, change the ini file, and then run the MSI file. And again, you've got two approvers associated with that. And then going into production, you only want to run a SQL script and run the MSI file, and the Release Manager will approve that deployment into production. So it's a typical release sequence. I'm going to show you a demo of the platform, which is basically it's off the VSALM build, and it's one that you can download and read and use the labs that come with it. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be using Brian Keller's Visual Studio ALM virtual machine. I have updated it to Visual Studio 2013 Update 2, as well as the Release Management Clients and Team Foundation Server. To start with, I'm only going to be using the Fabric and Fiber demo site, and I'm just going to be making a slight change to the home page to show you the release management capability. So this is a default development site for Fabric and Fiber. You can see we've got just the support information on there. Now I'm going to make a slight change to that on Visual Studio and call it Support version 2. close this, and then check in the code. And this will trigger a build. And if I look in build definitions, then we see that one's running, triggered for a change, and it's running. Now in Release Manager, the build is associated with that update, and it will deploy to the release management console as it builds. You can see there's the workflow that's going to go through. As it does the release from dev, it will ask for approvals into QA and into production. And the release path that it uses from dev, and it will automate it. It's an automated acceptance, automated validation, and it will automatically deploy. But it will send a mail to Brian Keller's account to ask for approval. And that's the approval to say that we've checked it and we want to release it into QA. The same process again in QA, and QA team has to approve it, and again it goes into production after that's been approved. As you can see, the acceptance step for production is not automated, and Brian Keller has to run the acceptance in order for it to be deployed. And again, the deployment, the validation, somebody from Ops team has to validate it. These are the configurations of the environments, and it just shows you the arbitrary connections, and tells you which server it's connected to. And again, here's the servers, and there's a server defined. So, as you can see now, I've got something waiting for me. If I look in my approval requests, there it is, it's asking me to approve, and we should have an email, which hasn't come through yet, but I will approve this. You can see that it's not updated yet. Well, there we go, there's the update. But for the QA site, which is here, that hasn't been updated. And neither has the production site. That hasn't been updated. But if I approve that release, that will now progress into the QA environment, and we'll see the update on there. And there we go, it's now updated into the QA environment, but it's still not on the production environment yet. And now I've been sent a request to approve the release into QA. So I will approve that release because I'm happy with it. And now it's asking me to accept the deployment in production. Just to show you, even though I've accepted the release, it still hasn't gone into production until I approve it. And there, I've approved that release into production. Now I can defer this release for later by giving it a date and time, but for the purposes of this, I want to show you the release now. And there, we've gone into production. And as you can see, the production site is now updated. And now I need to validate the deployment. So I've approved the validation. Now I can go into the Deployment Manager website associated with my releases. As you can see, this is my release into production. It's installed, approved production, deploy for production, all looks good. Those are the comments that I put. Previous stage, went into QA. Update looks good in QA, it's validated and accepted. And again into dev. You can see there's Brian Keller has accepted it from dev, contact looks good. And you can see this through each stage into QA and into production. As you can see, Release Manager is quite a powerful tool, and it will help automate all your releases. All you need to do to get it to run properly is configure all the bits and pieces, who's the acceptor, who's a deployer. You can see the sequence for each environment. Make sure you get this right, because if you get it wrong, it will do horrible things to your environments. And there you can associate it with a particular build to ensure that when a build is triggered, the release will automatically start. And there that ends the demonstration. Thank you very much. So I'll slide on to the next page, which is a bit of information. So licensing. So the Release Manager is bundled with MSDN Ultimate Premium and Test Professional editions of Visual Studio. The agents are licensed separately, so you get a standard license, which is processor-based, and it covers 2 physical CPUs and 2 endpoints or VMs. The Data Center license, which has an unlimited number of endpoints, but it still covers 2 physical CPUs. You get 2 free agents with Visual Studio Ultimate MSDN subscription, and there's a 7 times price multiplier between standard and enterprise. So if you're going to be deploying to more than 14 endpoints, it makes it worthwhile to buy the enterprise, because then it's effectively unlimited. You don't need a license to use the web UI, and if you really want to use Release Manager, time is running out, because until 30th of June, Microsoft are offering a very generous 30% discount on Visual Studio products. So get your orders in quickly. Okay, so how can we help? Well, we can assist with building the release workflows. We can look at the development of custom tooling and actions for those workflows. We can implement a proof of concept of release management service. We can support the full end-to-end release management process and provide skills transfer with on-site and off-site support. And we can provide release management training. We have a very good trainer who really does understand release management. So our additional services is we deliver consulting on the Visual Studio Suite. We deliver developer tools, deployment planning services, engagements for clients, and these are funded by Microsoft based on your software acceptance and enterprise agreements. We provide on-site, off-site and online training, and our training includes Coded UI, Microsoft Test Manager, web performance testing and load testing, as well as the Release Manager. And so for additional resources, so you can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Microsoft Pinpoint, and there's the Microsoft Release Management portal if you want more information about release management. And there's a dedicated microsite we host for Visual Studio at th.ms.com. I'm now going to pass you over to Mel.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex mentioned, guys, we are now taking questions. If you do have any questions, please do make sure you type them on your Q&A pod. We will take a few questions, and if there are further questions, then we will take them offline. So please do type in your questions on your Q&A pod. Okay, we got a few coming. So the first question I've got here is, will Release Manager communicate through a firewall? Alex?
Yeah, Release Manager can communicate through a firewall. The deployment agents actually communicate with the Release Management Server as opposed to the Release Management Server communicating with the release agent. So it's just opening a port back to the Release Manager Server through your firewall. You can also implement a gateway type server, which will act as a gateway through your firewall to reach your deployment agents, and that will come through the firewall.
Thank you, Alex. I've got a few more here. Next question is, when would you use Release Management Client, and when would you use the Microsoft Test Manager Lab Center?
That's a good question. Test Management Lab Center is ideal for running QA tests and spinning up different environments for running QA services. But really, with the Release Management Client, it's for deploying into multiple environments instead of just single stages as part of the test cycle. So you link it with potentially link it with an automated test within the Release Management Server and Release Management Client. And that would provide the automated tests on each stack, whereas Test Manager, Lab Center, would spin up different environments to run specific automated tests as part of the test cycle.
Thank you, Alex. I've got a few more, and then maybe we'll take some of them offline. Next question is, can I use my free MSDN agents on the production environment?
Well, this is a question I recently asked somebody from Microsoft, because it's all a bit confusing with MSDN only allowing really to use their products on development. But apparently you can use your 2 free MSDN agents on a production environment. So if you've got lots of users with MSDN Ultimate, potentially you may not need to buy as many agents.
Thank you, Alex. Next question. Does it support Linux, Unix platforms?
Sadly, it doesn't support Linux, Unix platforms directly, although using a Windows Gateway server, potentially you could get it to run on Linux or Unix through automated SSH scripts. So SCP to deploy up to the Linux program, and then remote execution to run the scripts. Whilst it's not exactly running deployments on agents, you can configure those tools as an agent, which will run on a Windows Server gateway towards that Linux box or Unix box.
Thank you, Alex. I think we'll complete the Q&A session at this time. Again, if there is any other question, we can just take them all offline. Again, before we go, the full demo recording will be available on demand, which will be sent to you automatically next week. Again, before we go, please do ask questions, or if you can ask questions offline, the contact details for Alex is on your screen right now. Hope to see you again at our next live session. We've got our next session scheduled next month. The date is Friday, the 11th of July. So our topic will be using Visual Studio Online for cloud load testing and application insights. So if you do want to attend that session or live webinar, please do email us or email Alex. His email address is on your screen right now. So thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon.